So a few days ago, in fact on Saturday, I spent half of my day visiting Stars Picker Audio Malaysia, which is one of the prominent and largest audio reseller here in Kuala Lumpur or Selangor. And in fact, I would like to openly say thank you to them for being very hospitable and very accommodating. In fact, not just me, to anybody else. In fact, I would encourage you to go there if you want to make a purchase of audio gears, because you will have the opportunity to test many audio equipment, not just limited to in-ear monitors, headphones, or even DAC amp. And they have really huge selection to choose from. And in fact, my visit there was specific to this one event that they have announced recently, which is a new release of Campfire audio gears. In particular, Campfire recently announced the release of 7 different type of IEM, 3 of them being universal IEM and 1 Bluetooth, and another 3 would be custom IEM. So in fact, I was there, spent my half day there testing the first 3 universal IEM, which are the latest iteration of Andromeda Emerald Sea, and then the popular Solaris Stellar Horizon, and also their flagship, which is the Trifecta Astral plane. I'd just like to clarify on a few things. Okay, first and foremost is that this is not a review. Let me just clarify that, because with just half a day and then with limited to probably like 1 hour per IEM, and definitely I don't have enough time to fully gauge the full potential and performance of those IEM. So take it as just sound impression as it is when listening to them out of the box. And talking about out of the box, second thing is that take into consideration that, these IEM are literally new. So when it comes to that aspect, remember that most IEM, especially dynamic driver, would require burn-in. So literally, this IEM does not have any kind of burn-in. My sound impression will be purely based on how they sound out of the box, okay? And then third, I'd like to clarify that, this Campfire, which I have tested, in fact, all 3 of them can be safely regarded as TOTL sort of territory, top of the line sound equipment. So in order to do that, I do have a reference which I can compare them. In fact, I have compared them against, which is my long-time favorite here. This is a Shure KSE 1500 with KSA 1200 Energizer model. This is a legitimate electrostatic, perhaps the only one, okay, available right now, other than stack. And of course, in order to make sure that I have the best source to test them all, I brought with me this hunky jumbo stack of this Venture Electronic DAC Prime, which is running on dual DAC, and also this 3000 milliwatt of runabout 2BFE, okay, with watt core here, which is running on 16.8 watt of battery. So definitely no issues there with source. Okay, let's start first with this, the most popular from Campfire Audio, the Andromeda Emerald Sea. And it is definitely a very interesting and very well built IEM, I must say, because when I first listened to it, the first thing that came to me was, wow, this IEM is very, very engaging, frontal, exciting, and vibrant. It is definitely something that I would consider as the blue curve, because I might even say it is as a mid-centric focus IEM, because the mid-range is very prominent. I feel that the mid-range itself, especially when it comes to, certain specific type of music like jazz, it can be kind of a bit like close in. So what I'm trying to say is that the soundstage of Andromeda Emerald Sea, at least to my hearing, does not sound wide at all. In fact, it is kind of a bit congested, because one of the reasons that need to be taken into consideration was I noticed the speed. All right. So this Andromeda is like, 5 balanced amateur. And one thing that it achieved properly first is that cohesion and coherency, which is top notch. Definitely that is something which I love about this Andromeda, being able to kind of like, synergize all different balanced amateur to work in harmony. So as a result of that, the sound signature itself, the nature of the sound, the characteristic of the sound itself is something which I would defined as very organic. In fact, quite surprising and not an easy thing for all balanced amateur setup to sound as organic as it is. I noticed that, this Andromeda Emerald Sea kind of a bit not as fast as how I prefer it, because when I listen to something like this, KSE 1500 or even Atimotic ER4S, which is a hardcore balanced amateur, they offer a lot more of speed. A speed to resolve, a speed to the momentum, to the pace, rhythm, and tempo. Okay, so when I subject, for example, like, highly complex jazz music, which have a lot of layering, a lot of, let's say, composition to the sound itself, the staging for, as heard using this Andromeda Emerald Sea, kind of like, it will compress in towards my face. If you are the type who prefer speed and resolution, perhaps you will find that, Andromeda Emerald Sea kind of a bit slow. But is it a bad thing? No, it is definitely not a bad thing. It's just a matter of preference. And despite, seemingly not as prompt with the speed itself, I do find that Andromeda SE synergize, or should I say play really well with certain genre of music, especially rock and metal. If you need a bit of smoothness and a bit of, let's say, mid-range kind of boosting, because typically rock and metal music will have a weak sort of mastering to the sound itself. So this Andromeda, would be able to bring forward the mid-range so that it will be a bit more engaging, okay, a bit more vibrant to the sound itself, but at the expense of soundstage. And otherwise, other than that, I think pretty much when it comes to technicalities, I can safely say that listening to Andromeda Emerald Sea kind of a bit similar to an IEM, which I am very familiar as well, which is Moondrop Blessing 2 and even Moondrop Blessing 3. And in fact, being critical, I would say that Moondrop Blessing 3 might have a slight advantage over Andromeda, especially when it comes to speed and resolution. Next on the menu is the Solaris Stellar Horizon. And in fact, as the name implies, it is definitely stellar when it comes to performance and sound. It is in fact the one that I like the most among all three of them. And I will tell you why. First, the tuning itself is definitely much more well balanced. In fact, edging closer towards neutral territory, which I love so very much. And in fact, the way it presents the dynamic from lower frequency to mid-range to upper frequency is just very well placed with the portion of how it tuned, that different dynamic range. It is, in fact, bassy enough, just nice, trying to be as neutral as possible. And the mid-range is kind of like frontal enough, not to feel recess. And the upper frequency, it is sparkly, energetic, but it is also very, very smooth. So manner of saying is that, when it comes to the presentation, the transient of the dynamic of how Solaris present it, it is definitely very entertaining and yet analytical and musical. Okay, so let's just put it this way. Technically, definitely, I would say that Solaris Stellar Horizon is definitely a step ahead of Andromeda Emerald Sea, especially when it comes to speed and resolution. As I mentioned earlier, I do find that Andromeda Emerald Sea have some issue with speed, okay, when it comes to complex music, at which the soundstage will cave in. No such issue with this Solaris, definitely, because even if the music gets really complex, the layering gets really like, on top of each other and everything, there's no element of caving in which I can sense. The music stays coherent, the layering itself stays clean, and in fact, the pace and the momentum as the music picks up remain consistent. So what I'm trying to say is that definitely as a result of this, Solaris offer a wider sense of soundstage as opposed to how it was heard from the Emerald Sea, Andromeda just now. When it comes to certain genre of music, definitely I would say that this Solaris is very suitable for analytical type of listening, especially if you are into classical or technical jazz. All right. For example, when listening to Cine Ig or even multi-layered song from Diana Krall or even Vivaldi, especially Vivaldi, classical, which I love, Four Seasons, listen to that. This Stellaris sounds superb stellar when it comes to presenting the sort of imaging. The way Solaris handle the attack and the resolution itself is definitely top notch. As good as it is, there is definitely some cons which I like to share from my perspective for this Solaris. And in fact, being critical as it is, because I am testing a TOTL IEM now, I wish Solaris could have done a bit better with certain element to the way it handles sound, especially with the air. You see, my reference, this one, Shure KSE 1500. The reason that I love it so much is because the way it handles the dynamic, it is very airy, lightweight, yet rich sounding, organic, and natural. Okay, what is missing from that Solaris is that element, which is, that sense of lightweight and airiness to the dynamic transient itself. It is definitely fast and resolving, but I find kind of a bit lacking when compared to something which is at similar level, TOTL, like this Shure KSE 1500. So definitely, if that were to be taken into consideration, I would say that KSE 1500 is still the superior one compared to Solaris Stellar Horizon. Last but not least, we have here the flagship for Campfire Audio, Trifecta Astral Plane. And in fact, the version which I have tested is in fact one of the 5 variant that you can choose from. They do have another 4 different type of color offered. And this Trifecta is in fact very special, one of a kind IEM with 3 dynamic driver arranged like this, like a triangle, hence the name Trifecta. And let me just put it this way, I am not impressed. Very sorry about that. Please forgive me, okay? Perhaps subjectively, I think, I wasn't able to appreciate Trifecta that much. So my impression on it will be very brief. First, all right, let's just put it this way. When I first listened to Trifecta, I had very high expectation because I was already impressed with the Solaris especially. I love Solaris sound. Very well balanced, like I mentioned earlier, technically competent as well. But when I listen to Trifecta, it is shocking, in fact. Shocking because the sound is different, definitely different. Not the kind of sound that you would typically hear from, balanced amateur hybrid or stuff like that. First, the sound itself is very natural, organic, traditional dynamic driver sort of tone and timbre balance. But the dynamic presentation itself, the presentation of the sound itself is super thick, dense, and rich. So if you are the type who love thick, commanding, engulfing sound, Trifecta has it. And in fact, if it's not too extreme for me to draw a comparison, if you have ever listened to Blonde, BL03, this is the sort of similar sound that I am hearing from Trifecta. Just multiply it by 3. Yeah, it is definitely designed for people who love very rich sounding IEM. And in fact, due to that, characteristic, perhaps, I feel that the technical aspect for Trifecta kind of a bit subdued because of that presentation, which is very bold with the sound itself. In fact, if I were to compare with Solaris and even, right, Campfire Andromeda Emerald Sea, those two will offer better technicalities, but not Trifecta. So because Trifecta is definitely slow sounding and the resolution itself is nowhere near the sort of performance which is offered by Solaris. And in fact, like I say, it is kind of like, not suitable for analytical listening. So definitely I would just gonna put it this way, right? If you listen to something like which is like classical or even let's say highly technical and analytical music, Trifecta will not be suitable. But if you listen to, fun sounding music or even let's say percussion music, rock, metal, or even blues music, Trifecta will be perfect for those type of music because it will impart, a good sense of inclusion into the sound itself. It is very engaging and very immersive with the sound itself. So in a way that, that is perhaps the biggest strength of Trifecta. But let me just put it this way. To be fair, I think because, again, remember I mentioned earlier this IEM came out of the box fresh like that, and especially for dynamic driver, they do need burn in, proper burn in. And I am pretty sure that this Trifecta, if I were to subject it to burn in for at least 100 or even 300 hours, 300 for 100 for each of the driver, right? It is definitely would be something which it is possible for me to like. All in all, it was a very entertaining, informational, and fruitful day for me, spending half of my day with Star Pickers Audio Malaysia. And again, I would like to thank them from the bottom of my heart for allowing me and other users, other consumers to test very expensive audio gears so that we might have a good idea before we decide anything. And I would like to encourage you as well. If you are in Selangor and Kuala Lumpur, please visit Star Speakers Audio Malaysia if you want to purchase something, because they would allow you to test it before you decide on anything. So definitely that is a very, very positive thing. And in fact, I'd like to remind you again, like I mentioned earlier, please take my sound impression with grain and salt. It is definitely something which is not to be considered as a review. It is more like, hands-on audio impression. But I hope that has been informational and useful to you. Until then, please stay tuned to Andy Audio Walk for more contents like this.